Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney, and today I am sitting with Ryan Skeffington, author of the Infinite Existence series, first with Lost Souls, and now the soon-to-be-released Eternal Dreams. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk with you tonight.
Oh, I really appreciate your excitement. Having people on the show and just talking shop about books is probably one of my most favorite things to do with Author Adjacent. So thank you for the opportunity. But as we're getting into this, why don't we first start off with just getting a little bit of blurb about first, I guess, Lost Souls, since that's your debut novel, and just kind of give an idea to the people of what your story is about.
Absolutely. So, Lost Souls is a science fiction action adventure that follows Maximus, the main character, a young engineer who is dissatisfied with his station in life. There are three things that I wanted to accomplish with this book. First, a journal entry to myself. I was dealing with the passing of my father and the emotional toll and grieving that came with that. And writing and telling stories was something that allowed me to process those emotions. Second was an ode to my favorite band, Parkway Drive. All of the chapters and the subheadings are tracks off of one of their album, Deep Blue. And the plot of the storyline follows the plot of the album. So I thought that was a unique challenge when writing a story. And then the third was just a challenge for myself. I had never done anything creative writing before, and I had the idea. I was like, what would happen if the government had Magneto's power? And I was like, I wonder if that book's ever been written. I should write that book. And so Lost Souls was born. Um, I loved the process so much that I was like, I need to add more characters so that I can do this again. I didn't even think of writing another standalone just because I loved the world that I had built. And so Kana's point of view and story came after the first draft so that I could continue writing.
That is interesting. I know you have a lot with the world building and the technology, and we'll definitely get into that later. I didn't know that as the prime motivations for writing Lost Souls, but it makes sense having read it. Like there is a very strong father son relationship throughout the story itself, and you dive very deeply into that. And there aren't really a lot of stories that dive into the emotional relationships between men, especially between men in family, fathers, sons, uncles, nephews, all that such. So that was a very interesting take into it, as we don't really get a lot of exposure to that, especially in indie and fantasy in general. So that was kind of nice to go over that. Uh, but yeah, that was sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but
No,
I
that's
didn't. I'm
okay.
kind of
I
rocked by that was the motivation. I had no idea, but it makes so much sense in retrospect.
Yeah,
Wow.
and one of the biggest, not maybe we'll call it criticism. One of the biggest criticisms of the book is the pacing. And
Mhm.
two of the three things that I wanted to accomplish affect the pacing in a way that I'm not actually telling you so much a traditional sci-fi and fantasy story. One is an ode to an album, so every chapter has a mark that I have to hit. And
Yeah.
me being a first-time writer, didn't know when to slow down or speed up to match the plot line of Kana's hero's journey. And so that is what book two and book three are for, is me delving into the craft of writing without having any pre-existing goals and desires. And then I really wanted to dive into my relationship with my father, just because I was missing him, and I wanted to share the world all of the great things that I had growing up and all the great memories that I had. And so I really slow the story down right around the middle of the book. And quote unquote the pace suffers for some readers, and that's okay. You live and you learn when you're writing your first novel. 12 drafts later, I'm extremely proud of it, and it propelled me into a new hobby and a creative outlet that I have found just ultimate joy in.
Yeah. First, I'm sorry for your loss, but thank you for sharing the beautiful story that it inspired. Um, there is a lot with really writing a debut novel and writing in general that you really just learn as you do it. Like there's so many stories that I've talked to a lot of people where they are hesitant to write this big or challenging story because they don't have the experience or they don't have the gumption to do it yet. And I even have that example. Like the story that I'm writing right now is not the one that I wanted to write, but the one that I thought I had the skill to. But
Hmm.
I really wish I would have tried the more difficult one at this point because you learn so much as you go. So with you going into your next book, Eternal Dreams, are there particular things that you learned from Lost Souls that are instantly translating over into the next one?
Everything about Eternal Dreams is improved because of writing the first one. I use the analogy of I would like to build a house, but I built a dog shed because I didn't know how to pour concrete or I didn't know what a skill saw was. I just didn't know what was required. And so you
Mm,
stumble and you fumble and then you publish. Uh, and then post release is when I started meeting other writers and the booktube community. I had no involvement with a writing community when I was doing it. So I was doing everything solo.
yeah.
And three people, I think, read the book before it got published. And so they can only help me so much. Like, if someone's trying to build a 3 bed, 2 bath house and they don't even have a screwdriver, you're like, hey, um, let's start with the smaller project. And I'm like, no, I'm going to finish this thing. Uh, First person versus third person, limited versus omniscient, past tense versus present tense. The very first draft of Lost Soul had every single one of those. And so one of the drafts was making sure everything was in third person. One of the
Mhm.
drafts was making sure it was in past tense. One of the drafts was making sure it was limited point of view. And just over and over and over and over going through the manuscript, I was like, oh, this is head hopping. I really love this sentence, but I can't have it because of the foundational structure that I have
Yeah.
set for the novel. um, when you like fundamentally just like know how to ride a bike after you've written your first novel, the second one goes so much faster. um, I drafted Eternal Dreams in 4 months, and
Like
that
the first
was,
draft or
I only do one draft. I then edit straight after that.
okay.
I don't rewrite things, and so like boom, 0 to 110,000 words in 4 months, and then
Wow.
from that point on, I start at the beginning and I just edit it because I am a severe architect slash plotter, planner, however you want to describe it. Every scene and every bullet point is planned before I begin writing.
I would really love to hear more about that process. How do you come up with your outline before you start writing?
Absolutely. So you start with the end and what you really want to write.
Yeah.
At the start of Lost Souls, it was more of just I need a place to put all my ideas. You've got, what if the government had Magneto's power? Oh, I love Halo, so it's a ring world. Oh, I love
Mhm.
Halo, so there's gravity hammers. Oh, I love Power Rangers, so they've got power armor. And soon I have for Lost Souls a 37-page Google Doc with just ideas and
Mhm.
characters and motivations and where what their background is. Because when you know their background, you can understand where their voice is coming from. Someone who grew up in the poorest of poor communities will not use highfalutin language that the wealthy and highly educated speak from. And so, if you build all of those backgrounds and character dynamics and character sheets, you can then just write from the get go. And then
Mhm.
for Eternal Dreams, after I had learned plotting and whatnot, it was a little bit easier because Book two is Kana's second third of her hero's journey. And so I had what I needed her to accomplish, what I needed Ratchet to accomplish, what I needed Eric's to accomplish, and the introduction of new villains and new characters. You create a timeline of those events, and then you just break them down into scenes. Once you get the scenes taken care of, you're like, all right, what's their motivation? Why are they here? What can I do in this scene that accomplishes more than one thing? They are going from point A to point B, but is there character conflict that I can introduce? All those things that you have no idea about when you do your very first novel, that you're like, I'm riding the bike, let me learn how to do a wheelie real quick, and that would be really cool. So you're riding the bike, but you're also doing tricks now. So
Yeah.
Eternal Dreams was a whole lot more fun, but also a whole lot more painful. It
How
went
so?
through 7 beta readers
Mhm.
and 5 editors. Um, I did not know about editing the first time because I was writing a book and then I published it, and I had one person who was quote unquote an editor. This time they're like, all right, you need a developmental editor, a line editor, proofreader, copier, alpha readers, beta readers, and so every time someone read it, I waited to give it to the next person until they were done. So every reader helped improve the dialogue, the pacing, the action, the
Wow.
clarity of sentences. And so instead of solo editing it like I did my first time, I had a team. Writing's a team sport, I've discovered.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
there's so many people that can help you with it, but that is really wild that you seem to have really developed and overhauled your system between the 2 different books.
there is nothing so motivating as not doing something well in my mind. And
Mhm.
seeing 2 and 3 star reviews when I was like, I've written a 5-star book. I am amazing. Come in and be like, oh, dang, I need to learn a whole lot more. I need to develop my craft a whole lot more if I want to produce a product that's in line with my expectations. I'm very proud of what I did with Lost Souls. Sometimes my feelings get hurt when I get a bad review because you put a lot of effort into
Of
novels.
course.
But the reality of it is I'm a guy who had no writing experience, no team behind me other than a couple friends, and I published a book. I should be super proud of myself,
You should
and
be, that's a lot of
I,
effort.
I absolutely am. But the expectation of thinking, I'm going to write just as well as Brandon Sanderson and Pierce Brown on my first go after what do they always say? I have 6 books that I've written before I sold my first one.
Yeah.
The delusion of me thinking I could get anywhere close to that needed a few knockdowns back to reality.
Setting those expectations and really learning from your experience is what learning as you write is all about. Like, there's so much you can learn about beforehand, and you should study your craft. But it's still important that you threw yourself out there and you're like, this is the story that I want to write. Right.
Hmm.
I'm going to try my best to do so. And for the most part, I think you did a great job. It is a phenomenal world. The characters are very interesting. And I'm very excited to see what happens in the next one. But
People were
we've gone
very
into
angry
a
about the
lot.
ending.
Oh, what was that?
I said people were very angry about my ending. I wanted to do a Game of Thrones season 1 style ending,
Hmm.
and people were not very happy about that.
Well, that's kind of something I think a lot of people struggle with is the story we want to tell versus the story that people want to listen to.
Hmm.
And there are going to be people that kind of just bounce off the thing that you want to do. And being true to yourself is important. And there is a little bit of a give and take between trying to figure out, okay, I want to write this story, but I want to write a story that people want to read. And you kind of have
Hmm.
to figure out that balance. And really, the best teacher for that is experience, and that's what you have now.
Yeah, people learn by doing, and
Mhm,
I ended Lost Souls one scene sooner in my first round edit, like at the very important moment with clashing between the 2 main characters. I was like,
mhm.
cut. And they're like, you can't do that. You have to give me some sort of closure and just let me come down
Yeah,
from what you just did to me. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I'll give you 250 words.
yeah. Well, have you heard the whole concept with, like, if you're writing a trilogy of books, the first one is always considered, like, the standalone with series potential is, like, the keywords that are thrown around, but it's
Hmm.
always, like, a book that can be by itself if it wants to be. The second book, you can do a cliffhanger, and then the
Hmm.
third book is supposed to be that needs to be a full conclusion of not just its story, but the whole trilogy story. And I really like that balance to aim for, but it is really hard to pull off because you have to
Hmm.
both conclude a story and continue one at the same time.
And I think I was really fortunate in that I wrote the first draft with one POV character. And so
Mm,
that story is concluded. And the storylines for the second and third book were added in post. And so I kind of set myself up for standalone with story potential from the very beginning. And I
mhm.
was just lucky enough that I was like, hey, I want to do this again. How do I enable myself to continue moving forward?
Yeah. At what point did you really make that decision that you wanted to go from something that was purely or most potentially a standalone to going into a series? Because I'm actually in that moment right now where
Hmm.
I'm finishing the latest draft pretty soon. I'm going to be handing it off to my editor, and I'm at this point where I could leave this as a standalone. There
Hmm.
are threads that I could pull on to continue, but I don't know which I should do. How did you make that decision?
It's as corny as it sounds, but you listen to your heart. I
I love it.
was finishing the novel and I was like, I want to keep doing this. I
Mm,
want to stay in this world. I want to stay with these characters. I want to see how this progresses because I left them in a state of chaotic disarray. And I was like, I need to see what this story becomes. And I think earlier in the show, you already answered your question. You're not even writing the story you want to write.
oh, good point. Oh, don't do that to me. Answer me with my own things.
Well, listen to your heart is the answer. And so you already told me what your heart wanted. I'm just saying it out loud so your ears can hear it.
You got me there. And now I will distract you with a question that I should have asked earlier that I totally glossed over. I usually start these interviews by asking, um, how did you get into writing itself? Like, what is your author origin story? Is this something where you're like, as a kid, I always knew I wanted to do this? Or is it something that you
Mhm.
kind of fell into as an adult?
I would say falling into it is a apt description. My wife calls me a hobby hopper. I
No.
do anything and everything under the sun for 6 months to a year, woodworking, photography, Twitch streaming, art, and then writing. About 4 or 5 years ago was when I started this. Writing is the one that stuck. I always used to beg and plead that I would get a job in corporate America that was nothing but strategy, so I could come
Hmm.
up with really good ideas and hand it off to a person who could execute.
Yeah.
I'm always just stirring up, oh, what if we combine this into this to get this outcome? And sure enough, writing and creating worlds and stories is perfect for ideation and giving yourself the ability to take what's in your head and turn it into tangible reality. So I hadn't even read a fictional novel when I started writing. From
Wow.
graduating high school all the way till I was 26, I think. So 8 years, I had read nothing but nonfiction, historical, business, and leadership books. Um, just
I love the
because,
self improvement angle.
yeah, constant dissatisfaction with one's status is both real life and fiction, give or take there with Maximus's
Valid.
storyline.
Yeah.
And so reading fiction wasn't something that I just fell into as a love. And I've slowly discovered this. I don't have like a vivid imagination. When people are reading and they're like, oh, I can see the movie in my head, I don't
Hmm.
see that. I see gray blobs of characters doing things. And so reading fiction is actually tough for me because it requires effort and work.
That's interesting. You don't normally hear that. Have you tried audiobooks, and is there a difference between when you're reading words on a page and someone is narrating towards you?
I really like audiobooks and I've gotten better at listening to them.
Mhm,
I can follow what the gray blobs are doing better, but when I read, I get a more all encompassing picture. I just have to read a lot slower and reread. And so
mhm.
fan art is actually one of my favorite things because
Yeah.
I'm able to pull the fan art's picture and apply it to the gray blob in my head and be like, ah, that's what this character looks like. I someone says brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm like, that's like a billion people, so that's
Mhm.
not telling me anything. So I love fan art. It makes reading enjoyable for me.
Was that then a very magical moment when you started seeing the cover art for the first time for Lost Souls?
Yeah, My artist is amazing, and I cannot wait to reveal the second cover in 8 days. But what I did was I took reference images from the internet. I put them
Mhm.
in like my equivalent of Photoshop, and I said, "Hey, I want this guy standing here, this girl standing here. I want this armor to look like this. Pull the grav hammer, pull a hammer. I want halo background, and I want space." And I'm just pulling like reference images and photoshopping them into this amalgamation of chaos, and he comes up
Mhm.
with a cover like that, and I'm like, wow, I can see the people in my own story. Um, and so for book two, when I started
Mhm.
writing characters, I went and got reference images before I started writing so that I
Mhm.
could describe them and the reader could then follow along, because I wrote book one all the way through without describing a single character. I did that in post because I just didn't
Yeah.
know how. But yes, having art that you kind of quote unquote direct from the world that you made is such an exciting feeling.
Oh, I agree. I'm working with a cover artist right now, and she's been giving me like the different passes that she's been doing, each one more detailed than the last. But to prep for that, I made a Google Doc that was
Hmm.
like, all right, I have this character. I want them roughly in this place. These are the things I think about when I see them in my head. And I wish I would have made that document so much sooner because it would have made describing them in the scenes of the story so much easier. Because then I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, Amara has brown hair. It's roughly this length.
Hmm.
Or this character has these color eyes, this build. This would have made so much easier to avoid the white room syndrome where your scenes could take place in space or on a farm. We don't know because we've never seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I found that it was super easy if all I did, like with Kana, for example, I said, Kana is Zendaya. Boom. I can Google
Ah.
Zendaya and her different hairstyles, her different aesthetics, all the different outfits she wears, her muscular build, what her
Hmm.
body frame looks like, her proportions, like arms, shoulders, length, how tall she is compared to other people. Like I have a character in book two who's 9 feet tall. Zendaya would have to do this
Yeah.
to be able to see that. And so I'm able to place these reference images into the scene that I'm writing. And that's kind of my little trick of how I describe the characters.
Yeah, using celebrities as like the base of what your characters look like is so
Mhm.
useful because there's so many pictures of them and
Yes.
videos and of them in motion and doing different things. And if they've done a movie or a show that's the similar aesthetic of your story, all the better. Pick a
Hmm.
Game of Thrones actor if you're a fantasy writer. You'll get a bunch of images and be like, "That's Jon Snow. He's in my movie, but or in my book, but his name is Gibraltar over here."
Hmm.
And he has a different personality, but he looks like this. So yeah, that would be incredibly useful. Yeah, I'm very excited for your reveal. You have the teaser that's been out there for a while right now, where it's like uh, very not glitch the word, very fuzzy. So we can
Hmm.
see a little bit of what's going on there, but I'm very excited to see the rest of it next week. I'll probably be shouting it from the rooftops and social media when it comes out. But I'm also just very excited to hear about all the processes and all the improvements that you've done with your craft. It makes me more excited to go into the next book. Like I'd already planned to get it, and I'm now even more so excited for it because I hear about everything that you've done and all the effort that you've put in to really become a better writer, which is kind of the point of this whole thing. We want to tell stories, we want to tell them well, and it's a journey of self-improvement.
And I think one of the biggest benefits that I got is all of the work that you put in, step by step, improving your craft makes the
Hmm.
next one even easier. And
Hmm.
so, next book, I'll have the ability to write interiority, which you described in one of your last videos. I was like, this didn't make sense to me until the second book. And so I'm
Yes.
able to include that in book two, and hopefully that elevates the storytelling um, quality. And when I practiced it and edited it, and I'm like, how do I word this without going to my they're not catchphrases, my anchor phrases. So because I don't have very good imagination and I was an athlete growing up,
Hmm.
when someone is fighting or exerting themselves, breathing is such a easy
It's
descriptor for me
huge.
because I write what I know, and the burning sensation of your lungs, your sinuses draining, and you're just gasping and your legs are giving out. And I would say something along the lines of insert description about their breathing
Mhm.
150 times in the second novel, and they're like, you have to do something different. And
Yeah.
so that comes out in editing and editing and editing. Book three, now I know how to do that already. So I won't have to cut and trim as much. So that either means I'll write a better story or it'll come out sooner.
That makes sense what you're saying about the breathing, that is something you really know, because I remember, uh starting Lost Souls, and the opening to start the Lost Souls is very like visceral and gritty, and it's very like suffocating in that moment. Like you feel what is happening as they wake up from these cryo situations and are immediately thrusted into the world where is both dangerous in a violent sort of way, but also just dangerous in a survival sense as well. And it is very gripping in that very beginning where you describe how they feel and their body and how it is just struggling to exist in this singular moment after so long of nothing.
I really both love and hate that scene because
Oh,
it
why do
was
you
the
hate it?
last scene that I wrote. And so
Okay.
I had wrote the whole book and wrote the
Oh.
whole book and wrote the whole book, and
Mhm.
I had a 5,000 word prologue, and they were like, people don't do prologues like this anymore. There's no omniscient, we left Earth and we used
Yeah.
rail guns to shoot the ships, and we're in this era and we're in this time frame, and this is how Xantium came to be. They're like, no one does that anymore, you need to delete that. And I was like, but I
Yeah.
need to let them know what happens. And so I wrote the scene with Peter after I had learned how to write a story. And so the first scene is super good.
Mhm.
Compared to the rest of it, it's the best scene in the book.
It's pretty wild as you're like going through and you're writing your drafts where, especially in your early drafts as a like an early writer, you write those first few chapters and you're like, oh, this is all right, and then you get to the end and you've improved so much by just writing one or two drafts of your story that when you go back to the beginning and you're like, oh shit, what is this, what did I do? Come on, I've just a second ago I was writing so much better, why do I have to go back to this? But it's
I
good to make that
understand why
exist so you
people
can improve it.
rewrite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a rewriter. I hate the act of deleting anything. It
Hmm.
hurts me. And so I just edit. And so if I can improve something, it feels better because I'm not wasting the effort.
Hmm.
But when an editor is like, you need to cut this paragraph, it's killing the scene's pacing. I'm like, don't make me do it, please. How do I just make this part faster? I don't want to
Yeah.
delete it. But in the grand scheme of things, it makes the scene more powerful. The reader
Hmm.
is more immersed. You're not action, 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 gritty, gripping, pace, paragraph about the memory that this thing is inserting to the character. Action, 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 pace,
Yeah.
pace, pace. They're like, just delete that, and you have such a good scene. I'm like, but I wrote that. It's so
Yeah.
good. It's just it's not right for the scene, or it should go somewhere else.
One of my favorite, like, I don't know if this would be called like an adage or just a thing I like to remember that's really easy to kind of keep in mind as I'm writing action scenes is action scenes are a lot like sex scenes when you write them. You just want to
Okay.
get in, get what you need to get done, and immediately get out. Do not hang out there for very long unless it's that type of book.
See, I got made fun of that in high school.
Oh. That took me a second. This is not a
You can.
PG-13 show, people. You can say what you want, but that
That
shocked
was
me.
good. Yeah. Oh man, that was a good joke. Okay, that you are right. That is great advice. I just couldn't resist.
Oh, it's all right. We're all still learning from it. Like we were saying earlier, like you learn as you do it, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So that each
Hmm.
book you make after the first, the second, the third, as long as you keep sticking to it, you're going to
Hmm.
get better. Like I talk to my friends and my family about this, and they ask me like how the writing is going, and I say it's good. Like I'm really enjoying the process, And really, the attitude that I've kind of fostered around it is that I'm going to keep doing it as long as I enjoy it. And
Hmm.
if I keep enjoying it, I'm just going to keep doing it until I die. And then by then, it's either I've succeeded and that's great, or I haven't and I'm dead and I don't care anymore. So
If
either
you
way,
like it and you do it till you die, then you have lived a fulfilled human life. And I applaud that.
that is a very succinct way to put it. And I appreciate that because I haven't figured out a good short way to put that. And I think you've gotten a lot of practice with it with all the good vibes you've been putting out on the web recently. So thank you for
Absolutely.
helping me
Um,
edit that.
I want to circle back to the fight scene because you
Oh
brought up a
yeah.
really great point that I think not all advice is good advice for every situation.
Oh, 100%.
Action can be boring and repetitive, and that's why sometimes the advice of get in, get out, move on is good advice because people don't utilize their fight scenes to do more than one thing.
Yeah.
You can only punch and kick for so long before the reader's like, hey, I'm just skipping paragraphs at this point to get to the resolution. But if
Yeah.
your conflict has progression in it, if it has problem solving in it, if it has elevated stakes or mini arcs of I'm going into a fight, I'm winning, oh no, they pulled something back, I'm losing, I'm on the back foot, how do I overcome this challenge? You're not just punching and kicking, you are creating a mini arc of progress, promises, progress, payoff,
Mhm.
and consequences within a page or two. Not so much just a paragraph of we punched each other until someone got knocked out, and then we're back to the story. If the fight has actual consequences within the story and it highlights the character's ability to solve problems with or without their violence, then I think you can marinate on those scenes. And I love writing fight scenes like that. The climax of Lost Souls is 3 chapters for one fight. And I
Yeah.
think everyone says it is blisteringly paced. Like, it's so fast that we just start and get out. And I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
fantastic. I didn't know that people wouldn't want that because everyone always says fight scenes can get pretty boring. And I was like, don't have a boring fight scene.
Yeah, I think the what the difference is in that situation is that it is so relevant to the plot and to the narrative and the progression of the characters who are participating in that fight
Hmm.
scene. Like fight scenes where it's just like bandits have just ambushed us on the road and we have a fight scene and then we continue on and nothing ever happens with the bandits again.
Hmm.
Those are the ones you want to get in and out of really quickly. They're fun, they're exciting. You can showcase the competency of your characters in both like martial or magic or the incompetence of certain characters as well. But the ones that you can really like pull along and like go through 3 chapters with are the ones where like this matters, not just to the narrative, not just to the plot, but to the characters who are participating in them. Like they are changing as a person as this fight scene progresses. Those are the ones that you can really dig into.
Yeah, and you said, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's sometimes your character is not going to succeed in the fight scene.
Yeah.
I think fight scenes are wonderful for revealing flaws because there's chaos, there's disorganization, there's action that is not standard to like human existence. You're
Hmm.
walking and you're running in normal day to day life, but you're not throwing your full body weight into something. And so, if you aren't practiced with those motions, you will be revealed as a fraud very quickly. And those
Yeah.
consequences are fantastic. And I do that a little bit in book 2, which I'm really excited for because I love fight scenes that are relevant and move the plot and pacing forward.
Hmm.
But there's a dichotomy in this scene of someone who is practiced, who is blooded, who is ready for vengeance, and someone who is hopeful and naive and unprepared. How do their actions change based on their previous experiences? Same setup, same type of opponent, same room, 2 completely different fight scenes.
Mm. That's a nice way of showing progression when you mirror scenes like that to just show the change the character has gone through. I like that a lot. Have you read anything by R.A. Salvatore before?
I have not.
If you are a lover of fight
Okay.
scenes,
R.A.
definitely check him
Salvatore.
out.
Okay.
He's written a lot of books, specifically within like the D&D universe.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, a bunch of them by Driss Stewardon, or the main character is Driss Stewardon,
Okay.
and he's a dark elf. He's lived for a long time, so there's a lot of stories around him. And he was my first exposure. Salvatore was my first exposure to how well choreographed and how intense fight scenes can be. If you
Mm-hmm.
love fight scenes, definitely check out anything he has written. It's really good.
Absolutely. I appreciate the recommendation. And after writing Lost Souls, I really did get into reading. I finished the Red Rising trilogy last year, and that has
Oh,
helped
nice.
me a lot. Just from going from reading zero to reading an entire series of progression and character and understanding what people like and don't like about those characters, I can then take that experience of having read the thing and seeing what people enjoyed and didn't enjoy,
Hmm.
and put it into mine. And I think the biggest thing as a first time writer with very little experience that I learned, the biggest takeaway from Lost Souls to Eternal Dreams was people don't want to read about people, they want to read about characters. And I was like, oh, that really stunk because I tried to make
Yeah.
Maximus a person because you want them to have levels and depth and you don't want them to be one note. Well, normal, really deep human beings are boring. We're all people. You need
Yeah.
something that gives them an edge or something that's memorable. Severo in Red Rising is one of those people that I latched onto as like, this is what that means. When he
Hmm.
does something, you know it's him. It's only him. It's only ever going to be him. Anyone who does something like him is a cheap knockoff. And
Yep.
so that was a very powerful lesson for just elevating the craft of character.
Reading is like really the second best way you can learn to get better at writing. The first is, to me, the first is writing. You get better at
Hmm.
writing just by simply doing it. But the more you do it and the more you read, you kind of, as you're reading, you see the author behind the page and you see how the sausage is being made. And in my experience, I feel like I appreciate books more when they're done well because I now know more about the craft. Where I'm like, oh, I see that you just seeded this narrative plot or this character
Hmm.
change. I'm excited to see what happens with that later, with that little bit of foreshadowing. Or when characters interact, I'm like, oh, that was a very clever way to tell me about the world and everything that's happening in the story by having these two people talk to each other. I appreciate that. Thank you. Uh,
Yeah, every
I
person
just
who's
love
ever
that
been
dynamic.
every person who's ever been good at something had a coach. You
Yeah.
just are lucky enough that you can have any coach that you want, as many different coaches as you want, in as many genres as you want. So I understand now why people say to write well, you need to read wide.
Hmm. That's really interesting that you didn't have a lot of reading experience before you started getting into Lost Souls. Did you have particular influences of any kind of media that told you, okay, I'm going to write Lost Souls. It's going to be this space sci-fi influence. You mentioned Halo earlier,
Hmm.
but is there anything else in particular that really like pulled at you, or like this has got to be in the story?
From a young age, I always loved space. And so I knew if I wrote anything, it was going to be science fiction.
Hmm.
Halo was a game that I played for decades, and that was an inspiration. I saw the first Dune in theaters when it came out, and then I read the book. And so I really enjoyed, or I listened to it. So I really enjoyed it because I had the images of the movie to attribute to the audiobook. And so
Hmm.
Dune was huge in just kind of teaching me, hey, beginning, middle, end. This is what a character does. It kind of hurt me a little bit because Frank Herbert wrote in omniscient perspective, and so
Hmm.
head hopping was something that I did a lot because I was like, "Oh, it would be so powerful if we knew what
Yeah.
the other person was thinking in this scene." But you can't do that. Bad, naughty, and so you have to write it as like, the main POV character seems to have noticed that the other character was thinking or feeling this. And it's like a cheap way to show, hey, we're noticing what the other character's thinking without saying it.
Yeah.
But I love movies. And before I started writing, I would only watch a movie one time because I hated knowing what was coming. But like you
Mm,
said, now when you're writing, you pick up on all the decisions that the directors and actors are making. So now I love rewatching movies because I'll notice the little details. We just went and saw Interstellar in IMAX for the 10-year anniversary, and
wow.
every time you get to watch Interstellar, you see something new, you learn something new, you pick up on a subtle detail that you didn't the first time around because it's a 2 hour, 45-minute movie. You're not going to get
Mhm.
everything. And so it has given me the ability to savor and enjoy creative media in all forms a little bit more.
That's something I really like about time travel movies or books and stories in general is that is a medium or a type of story that tends to really love seeding all these tiny little things, and you're never going to pick them all up on the first go. Um, so they're really satisfying to read a second or a third time because then you're like, oh my God, this happened right there. That's from when he did this in like 30 chapters. So
Mhm.
that's always very satisfying to come up and pick up those, but it just makes learning from a story so much easier by rereading it because you pick up so much past your first experience, which is just consuming the story.
Speaking of foreshadowing and rereading, it
Oh
took
yeah.
me a little while to learn what readers pick up on. And
Hmm.
so while I was writing Eternal Dreams, I had people go back and reread Lost Souls. And when they would get to a reference to Lost Souls in Eternal Dreams, I'd say, "Did you pick that up?" They're like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Well, in chapter 7, he says this in the fourth paragraph, and this is a direct allegory to that." And they're like, I read your book 8 months ago. I'm not going to remember that. So you got to be a little bit
Yeah.
more like pounding them with the references and reiterating things. And if you want to foreshadow something, you got to do it like 3 times before they pick up on something. Um, but at the same time, the caveat to that is you just have to live with readers are going to miss things
Yeah.
because they're listening to the audiobook while they're driving. They're reading while their kids are jumping on the couch and distracting them. And they're not going to get everything. So don't make your story critically dependent on one sentence in the very beginning of the book.
Yeah. If it's important for them to know it, you should make it obvious that they should
Mhm.
learn this. Like, did you ever read the Wheel of Time series?
I haven't, and I am both inspired to and terrified to read it.
That's
I don't.
exactly how I feel about Malazan.
Yeah, both of
I'm not
them.
there yet. At some
Yeah.
point I'll get there, but it's scary.
Wheel of Time, I'm scared that I'll waste my time because of
Mhm.
the description of the slog in the middle. Malazan, I'm just not. I'm scared I'm not smart enough.
That is definitely my fear for Malazan as well. I was actually talking to someone recently online about the slog in the Wheel of Time, and the best way to describe it is the story starts out about these characters right here,
Hmm.
and they are still primary characters throughout the whole 14 book stories. It's a lot of books. It feels like fantasy homework sometimes. But what makes the slog in the middle is that we have all those main characters, but then as we go, we're getting more characters introduced and their
Hmm.
stories begin to matter more. So there's the main character stories kind of like fade into the background a little bit more as these other side characters become temporary main characters. And
Hmm.
that's why it becomes like a huge pacing issue because the series sets the promise of the story is about these people right here. But then
Hmm.
as we keep going, we're like, oh, the story's no longer about these people. And then we keep going and like, okay, it's about these people again. And
Hmm.
that's what creates the slog in the Wheel of Time. I feel that it's worth it once you get it to the end. I must feel that way because I've done it to myself twice, but it is difficult to get through. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is a lot of story. It could have been much shorter, but it's still very satisfying. But the reason I bring it up is because every book starts the same way with
Hmm.
almost the exact same lines, but expanded slightly differently, talking about like the winds of change and the winds of time, because it's a semi, it's not time travel, but it is time adjacent story.
Hmm.
And so every book starts exactly the same way, so that you always know what the theme is and what this very important thing to the core is. So he beats you over the head with it over 14 books so that you
Hmm.
never forget it. But
You
it's
read the
hard to
same
create that
prologue
balance.
14 times.
Oh, you mean like Brandon Sanderson? I'm just saying, we got that scene what, 5 times from different perspectives, and it was really interesting. But by the like the fourth or fifth one, I was like, okay, I know pretty much what's happening here. But it was interesting at the same time to get it from different perspectives. But that's not really what we're here for, talking about these huge ass series. I'm actually very interested in what are you working on recently, because you have your second book coming out soon, I believe in
Hmm.
June, correct?
That's correct.
Have you been working on the third one since then, or what else have you been working on?
So book two is still in progress.
Oh,
um, Funny story about writing being a team sport.
okay.
Sometimes your teammates aren't right for you.
Hmm.
I sent it off to the final editor last Thanksgiving, and they did not finish it because they didn't know what was happening. And
Mm.
so they got about 60% the way through, and they're like, I don't know what's going on, so I can't help you edit this. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what's going on? You
It's rough.
didn't ask a single question. You didn't email me. You didn't say anything. It was just like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Over and over and over and over again. So I was like, cool. We're going to regroup. We're going to regather. We're going to go get some more help. And so I found a friend who helped me developmentally edit it one more time, just for
Mm.
clarity's sake, making sure everything that I was saying was understood. And then right now it is with a line editor and proofreader for like a combo of making sure my periods are in the right spot, making sure my colons
Yep.
and quotations are all there and where they need to be, making sure that if a word isn't misspelled, it's the right word.
Hmm.
I was reading a book last night that's soon to be released, "Toothsucker" by Caden Love,
Ah,
and
yeah, I've seen that around.
one of his sentences was like, "I needed to free my country," and I'm like, did you mean flee your country? And that's really hard to pick up in editing because it's not misspelled. It reads really nicely, and your brain
Hmm.
knows exactly what you want it to say, so you just miss things like that.
Yeah,
So I was able to say, "Hey, did you mean this?" And he was like, "Yes, you're the best."
nice.
And so I'm doing that with Eternal Dreams right now, is making sure that clarity, sentence structure, and grammar and punctuation are all good, um, and hoping to have that ready, done, complete, formatted, sent for publishers by the end of May. And ARCs will go out at the beginning of June for a release date at the end of June. Um, One thing that I do or started doing from Lost Souls to Eternal Dreams was I wrote all of Lost Souls, and then I
Hmm.
planned Eternal Dreams so that if anything needed to happen foreshadowing element wise, I was able to put it in Lost Souls before it got published.
Oh,
And
that's a good idea.
it really helps that I'm a really structural architect of a planner, and that I know every single thing that's going to happen in the book, what's important to let the reader know in book one. So I have been doing that for book three. Book three's ending is going to absolutely crush you. I'm so excited. I didn't know I
I'm
was
not ready.
a horrible person when I started writing, but I am, and I'm so excited. There is so much pain and suffering that I just feel bad for my characters now, which I never thought I would.
Oh
Um,
God.
but like an actual reference to what I was talking about, there's a scene at the end of chapter four. It's an unnamed point of view. It's a doctor, and you get to see how the specters are made, tested on, and treated in this world. He is the villain in book two, but you just get
Oh.
a snippet. He's one of them. There are multiple antagonists, and so I keep
Oof.
expanding the world as we get into the next books. And so that was a teaser of, hey, I wanted to show you in book one how specters worked. And then in book two, I was like, oh, that unnamed doctor could be this guy. And so I
Mhm.
rewrote all of his dialogue to be true to the character of book two.
I may need to go reread chapter 4 after this. The book is now staring at me,
Yeah.
letting me know that I might get some interesting insights into the next book. So you were
uh,
talking about earlier how so you are a big plotter. You've said that multiple times. Does plotting from the end of the story backwards make it easier to foreshadow? Or did I misunderstand you earlier?
no, you. For book one, I didn't have the ending, or I didn't even have book two and three in mind. So I had the ending of. I'll rephrase that because book one is just a unicorn. Because book one's plot is based off of a
Hmm.
music album. So the
Yeah.
character was going to do what the character was going to do the entire time, but the
Hmm.
music album ends on a vague note. It leaves it
Mm.
up to interpretation. And minor spoiler warning, if you don't want to know, mute it for 5 seconds. But I said, what
We'll
if the
be
good
right
guy,
back.
yeah, what if the good guy loses?
Mhm.
Because the music album goes on the crusade against the unjust world, and it doesn't let you know if he conquers it or succumbs to it. And I'm like, oh, what if he doesn't win? And that is
Mhm.
how I thought about the ending of Lost Souls as I was like 65% the way through. And then I had done my plotting and my planning of book two, and I knew exactly how book two was going to end. Um, Maybe 10 to 15% into starting to think about book two. And so everything was just a journey along the second third of the hero's journey to get from A to B with really interesting scenes and characters.
Nice. I've heard a lot of great things about starting from the end and working your way back to the beginning. And it's a strategy that I'm very interested in trying. But I think you're the first person that I've talked to that went like, yeah, that's how my books are laid out. That's how I figured it out. So thank you for adding credence to this idea that I really want to do. But
Absolutely. And I think you do
oh,
that in real life too. If you want to build a skyscraper, you're like, huh, a skyscraper at this spot would be really cool.
mhm,
Well, you want it to look like this, and you want it to be shaped like this, and then you have to dig into city permitting, and then you have to dig into
mm.
design, and then you start at the beginning of what are the logical steps to get to the thing.
No, that
Same
makes a
thing with
lot
a
of
book.
sense. So I gotta ask then, like, are you writing like full time? That is your day job, or do you do something else, and then this is what you do on the side?
Yeah, I do many things. I am an
I
engineer.
assumed by your hobbies.
Yes, yes. I'm an engineer by my day job. I write in the evenings. And Lost Souls is a disconjointed mess that it is because I had four jobs, including writing Lost Souls while I wrote it.
Oh my god.
I had my day job. I was
Yeah.
working consulting in the evening to pay for the startup that I was founding. And writing was just a creative outlet to get my mind from thinking about business all day long.
Yeah.
Um, and so Eternal Dreams was so much easier because I just had my day job and I was
Yeah.
writing in the evenings, and that made it so much easier. And same thing with book three, just the day job, and then going into book three with no other pre commitments.
That's got to be nice. So, as your day job as an engineer, then I'm assuming a lot of that came into influencing what you wrote into Lost Souls, given that there is a lot of engineering into it. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
The chemical equations are straight from my college chemistry, organic chemistry classes. So if xanthium was a real life metal, those chemical reactions would be realistic.
Oh, that's really cool. I like those
So,
things because it's like nice little Easter eggs for like if you want to dig into it, you get to find this little treasure. But if you
mhm.
don't want to dig into it, you can still enjoy the story. Like you're not taking away anything by not knowing chemistry, especially organic chem, which is like a nightmare for most people.
Don't worry, it's tear inducing. So yes, it is a nightmare. And I do want to highlight how much my wife helped me on Lost Souls. She's a dietitian, and so she
Hmm.
took the scientific route through college, where I took the engineering
Hmm.
route. So she knows the human body better than I will for the rest of my life. And so I using oxygen as a fundamental building block of the story and the world and mechanism of control, I was like, can you explain the Krebs cycle? What is respiration? How does glucose interact with the body? What's the liver look like these days? And she was like telling me about erythropoietin and nephrons and words that I just was like, all right, I'm going to Google that. I'm going to Google that. I'm going to put that in
Yeah.
there. And so for the people who are smart and sciencey, it's real. But for the people who don't care, you can read the story and get through it, and it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't take away anything because you don't know what's going on.
So she had a big addition to everything that goes around with like the serum and later editions of the serum. I'm not going to spoiler anything. So
Yes.
that's where you got a lot of those inputs away from your engineering background.
Oh, I was annoying the crap out of her, and she was like, I cannot wait for you to be done with this.
uh, that is something I was talking with a while ago, Joseph John Lee, about how big of an influence our spouses really are on our work. Because, like, yes,
Mhm.
it writing can be very solitary. And what we were talking about earlier with like it takes a village to write a book is just having someone that you can just bounce those ideas off and talk to. And having someone who lives in your home and you can immediately do it is incredibly thankful and useful to us. So, thank you, spouses. You're great.
We love you. And speaking of, you just sparked an idea that having a team really helps with. When
Hmm.
you're practicing a skill, repetitions really matter. When
Hmm.
you're doing a book, your repetition cycle is really long. You write a book every 2 years. And so
Yeah.
you getting help along the way is vitally important, unless you're just
Hmm.
someone who can crank out a book in 6 months. I'm not that person because I
But
take my editing
bless you.
extremely seriously.
Hmm.
And because I'm a plotter, it's super in depth. But I think one of your pre-written questions was advice for new writers. If you
Yes, I
don't
would love to
have
hear if you have something.
if you don't have the team, that's okay. I recommend starting to build one. You don't need
Hmm.
one. Start with something smaller that you can get a full repetition in before you give up. Building the habit of doing the thing and getting the cadence and setting it in is great for really long projects, but the act of finishing is so motivational. I finished book one and I was like, I want to do this again. So
Oh
if
my
you can
God.
do a 10,000, 15,000 word story and you're like, ooh, I love this thing, then you can write 400,000 words because you've done the cycle, you like the process, you like the journey, you like the grind, you don't like the outcome. If you like just the outcome, you won't suffer through the middle.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Like enjoying the suffering is incredibly important. That's something I learned a lot from multiple sources. Like that's the whole thing with Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives is like journey before destination. Just the whole
Hmm.
idea of enjoying the journey is really what makes it worth it. I am a huge fan of Marcus Aurelius's meditations, and that's like
Hmm.
a big component of Stoicism and his book in general. It's just like if you enjoy the suffering, if you enjoy wearing yourself down to do the thing that you love, then you're going to love it every day, no
Hmm.
matter what happens. I
And
do
I
like that.
think reading self-help, philosophical books, business, whatever, helps make us better writers because we are writing characters, and the
Mhm.
more we know about humanity in general, the more deep, the more creative, and the more unique our characters can be. And I had a stack of books over here a while ago. Wife told me to clean it up, so they're now all on the bookshelf. But Meditations is up there, and I was
Very
reading it, and I
nice.
was talking about it, and I was analyzing it. And I met somebody, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't really like Stoicism because it teaches you to forget about the rest of the world, and it can turn you into a very stone cold individual who doesn't harbor the pain and suffering of others." I'm like, "Wow, that is the
That's a very interesting
antithesis
take.
of
Yeah.
ensuring that I am fully in control of myself and my emotions, and I don't respond to the panicking or bickering of others is great for individual control of autonomy and one's life. But if you take it too far, you then become numb to the existence of other individuals around you.
Oh yeah. I think one of my favorite quotes is "Everything in moderation, including moderation." I don't remember who said it. I'm sure someone can remind me at some point on the internet. I know it was somebody famous, but I absolutely love it.
Was it Hunter Thompson?
I absolutely have no idea.
Okay. I think it. We'll just leave it as an unknown until someone Googles it and tells us in the comments.
Thank you, random commenter, for letting us know.
I'm going to put $1 on it being Hunter S. Thompson, I believe is his last name. But that's okay. In the day and age of being able to Google things instantly and get the answer, not knowing something for a few minutes is fine.
It's kind of nice. I like the debate. I like the
We used
conversation
to
that it
argue
generates.
so much as kids. No, you're wrong. No,
Yeah.
you're wrong. And there was no way to tell who was right or wrong. You just got the thrill of yelling at each other. Not anymore.
Nope.
All
We
right,
have
kids,
the
turn it
instant
on airplane
answers.
mode.
Thanks, internet. You ruined everything, let alone all the great things you gave us.
Now we just need to have AI models argue with each other and give us different answers.
We'll just have the joy of watching them bicker.
It's like I Am Legend, but instead of like making the world better, they're just arguing each other about semantics.
This is going to be wonderful. All right. I think that's going to be about it for us on time. Please do tell the people where can they find you and what you've been working on lately so that we can really like plug you up right now.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the opportunity. If you want to find me, you can go to ryanskeffington.com to find the pre-order of Eternal Dreams. All proceeds until release date will be donated to a charity, Folds of Honor, providing scholarships for the children of fallen veterans and first responders, a charity that I do really believe in and support. At Ryan Skeff is my social media handles. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Discord, X, Blue Sky, and anything. I'm there. My DMs are open. I deal with bots every single day. Just let me know that you're a human when you message me, and happy to answer questions, talk books, and deal with general shenanigans on the internet.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Ryan, for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a wonderful night, everybody.
Good night, everybody, and don't forget the journey from writer to author might be long, but until then, let's be author adjacent together.